What ancient city has been a gateway between continents and a flashpoint in history, yet remains a quiet corner of Europe and Africa? Welcome to the world of Ceuta.
Hey, it's Garrett here, feeling totally excited to dive into today's topic.
And I'm Leah, really looking forward to exploring this fascinating subject on Laid Back Learning with Leah and Garrett.
All right, let's set the stage for this one. Today, we're talking about Ceuta, a Spanish autonomous city planted right on the North African coast at the Strait of Gibraltar. Two seas meet there, and honestly, so do a lot of stories. Personal note here. The first time I ferried over from Algeciras to Ceuta, I remember stepping off and hearing Spanish and Arabic flow back and forth like it was one conversation. A shopkeeper greeted me in Spanish, turned to his cousin and switched to Darija, which is Moroccan Arabic, then helped a tourist in English. It felt like a living crossroads. The scent of coffee, the call to prayer drifting over the port, church bells a few streets away. That mix really stuck with me.
Let's open the book on this. Ceuta sits on a narrow peninsula called La Almina, joined to mainland Africa by a tiny isthmus. Quick definition: an isthmus is just a thin strip of land connecting two bigger pieces of land. Because it's so narrow, it's easier to defend, and it overlooks the Strait of Gibraltar, which is the short waterway linking the Atlantic Ocean to the Mediterranean Sea. That choke point idea means, in simple terms, whoever watches this doorway sees a lot of important ships go by.
Yeah, and that's pretty cool, right? Ceuta is also officially part of Spain, with its own Statute of Autonomy from the mid-1990s. It's within the European Union framework, but it runs a special low-tax regime. Think of it as EU rules, plus some tailored tax perks that boost retail and logistics. The city uses the euro. Day to day, you hear Spanish everywhere, but Moroccan Arabic is super common at home and in the neighborhoods. Estimates recently put it at around 60% Spanish first speakers and roughly 40% Arabic first speakers, with a small Sindhi-speaking community too. That bilingual rhythm is just baked into the place.
Culturally, it's layered. Predominantly Spanish Christians and Arab Muslims, plus small but historic Jewish and Hindu communities. Since 2010, Eid al-Adha has been an official holiday there. That's the annual Islamic festival of sacrifice, and it's kind of a big deal symbolically because it shows the city's institutions reflect its communities. Also, geographically speaking, Ceuta's ringed by high points like Monte Hacho, which watches the harbor, and some scholars even debate whether Monte Hacho or nearby Jebel Musa in Morocco is the southern pillar of Hercules from classical mythology. That's the old idea of two promontories flanking the strait, the other being the Rock of Gibraltar up north.
And climate check before we time travel. Ceuta gets a maritime Mediterranean vibe. Winters are mild, summers are warm but tempered by sea breezes, and rain mostly skips the summer months. There's also a wild natural angle. The peninsula is a bottleneck for migrating birds. Raptors and storks stack up there in spring and autumn. Picture thousands of honey buzzards and black kites surfing thermals over the ridgelines. It's like rush hour in the sky.
Okay, here we go from the top. Early days. The Phoenicians, who were seafaring traders from the eastern Mediterranean, set up a defensible outpost on this isthmus in the early 1st millennium BC. They loved good harbors and tight choke points. After the Punic Wars, when Carthage fell, Rome's influence spread across North Africa. Ceuta's ancient name was Septem Fratris, or just Septem, meaning 7 brothers, referencing local hills. It became part of the Roman world. By the late 4th century, we're looking at a town of maybe 10,000 people, largely Christian, speaking African Romance, which is basically a local Latin dialect. And they were known for fish salting, a classic Roman industry that shipped preserved fish across the Western Med.
Then the dominoes fall. Vandal invasions in the 5th century shake the region. The Byzantines, that's the Eastern Roman Empire based in Constantinople, clawed back parts of North Africa around the 530s. Septem became a Western outpost, which tells you how far they were projecting from home. Later, its ties to Iberia stayed strong. Fast forward to the early 700s and the Islamic expansions. You'll sometimes hear the legend of Count Julian of Septem, who supposedly helped Tariq ibn Ziyad cross into Spain. Tariq was a general who led the initial Muslim forces in 711, but historians say the Count Julian story is more romance than record. Either way, Islamic rule took root across the strait quickly.
And then the Great Berber Revolt in the 740s hits hard. Berber groups who had converted to Islam were challenging Arab leadership. Ceuta, then called Ceuta in Arabic, was destroyed in that turmoil and shrank for a time. In the 800s, a Berber leader named Majakas founded a local dynasty, the Banu Isam, who ran things for a few generations. In 931, the Umayyads of Cordoba, led by Abdurrahman III, folded Ceuta into their orbit alongside Melilla. Quick ID, the Umayyads in Iberia were a powerful caliphal dynasty that competed with the Fatimids for influence across the western Mediterranean. After Cordoba's caliphate broke apart in the early 1000s, a little kingdom called the Taifa of Malaga included Ceuta. Malaga was the capital, and Ceuta served as the heir's seat. That alone says Ceuta mattered as a maritime base.
Power kept changing hands. The Almoravids, then the Almohads, both Berber empires with reformist religious agendas, took turns ruling the region from the late 1000s into the 1100s. By the late 1200s, the Hafsids from Tunis lost their grip. Local families like the Banu al-Azafi and then the Marinids from Fez battled for the city. Aragon from Iberia even lent help at points. All this is the background hum when Portugal suddenly shows up in a big way in 1415.
Here's where it gets really interesting. In August 1415, King John I of Portugal led an enormous armada to seize Ceuta. Reports say about 200 ships and 45,000 men, and wild detail only a handful of Portuguese casualties. Álvaro Vaz de Almada, a Portuguese commander, hoisted a flag that looked like Lisbon's banner, and that's basically the template of Ceuta's flag even now. Henry the Navigator, the prince associated with early Atlantic exploration, was wounded but made his name there.
Let's dig into this. The early Portuguese governor, Pedro de Menezes, had to hold Ceuta against serious pressure. The Marinids laid siege in 1419. Portuguese and then later on, during the Iberian Union, Spanish logistics kept the place fed and armed from ports like Cadiz and Gibraltar. But here's a strategic lesson. After the failed Portuguese push on Tangier in 1437, it became clear that Ceuta alone, without a backdoor to the Moroccan interior, wasn't the trade magnet they'd hoped. No control of the trans-Saharan routes meant less gold and goods flowing through the city. Portugal learned that a port without a hinterland can be a fiscal sink. That realization nudged the Portuguese to look seaward even harder, toward Atlantic islands and beyond.
And the walls reflect that pressure. In the 1540s, the Portuguese built what are called the Royal Walls of Ceuta. They look like the newfangled star-shaped fort style of that era, sometimes called trace italienne, which just means angled bastions to better deflect cannon fire. There's a navigable moat right through the isthmus and a drawbridge. You can still see bastions with names like Coraza Alta and Mallorquins. The poet Luis de Camões lived in Ceuta in the 1550s, and not kidding, lost an eye in battle. He later wrote Os Lusíadas, the Portuguese national epic, and those frontier vibes show up in that poem's spirit.
Big dynastic twist incoming. In 1580, Portugal and Spain shared a monarch in what's called the Iberian Union. During that half-century, Ceuta pulled closer to Spain. So when Portugal broke free again in 1640, Ceuta made a unique choice and stayed with Spain. That was later recognized formally by the Treaty of Lisbon in January 1668. From then on, Spanish garrisons and settlers shaped the city. And that's right, when Morocco's ruler Moulay Ismail put the squeeze on. From 1694 to 1727, Ceuta endured a very long siege. Historians sometimes call it the longest in history, though definitions vary because the intensity ebbed and flowed. Either way, decades under pressure remade Ceuta into a firmly Spanish stronghold.
Moving right along through the modern era, during the Napoleonic Wars, Spain let Britain occupy Ceuta from 1810 to 1815 to help secure the strait against France. Then came the Hispano-Moroccan War of 1859 to 1860, with battles like Tetuan reshaping the border understanding around Ceuta. In the 20th century, Ceuta figured in the Spanish Civil War. Francisco Franco, who led the nationalist side, had ties to the Army of Africa. There's a 1940 obelisk called Llano Amarillo honoring him that still shows old symbols, though it's basically a relic now.
Fast forward to the present vibe. Spain recognized Morocco's independence in 1956, but kept Ceuta. In 1995, Ceuta got its Statute of Autonomy under the Spanish Constitution. It's got its own assembly and a mayor-president. The economy runs on port activity, retail with that low-tax edge, some industry, and steady ferry traffic to Algeciras. There's also a cross-border trade scene with Morocco. You'll hear about portadoras. Those are mainly Moroccan women who carry goods across the frontier on foot under specific customs rules. It's a grueling job and part of a bigger gray market ecosystem created by tax differences.
And we can't skip border security. Ceuta has a fortified fence on the land side, with one main vehicular and pedestrian crossing near Fnidec, and a separate pedestrian crossing between Benzu and Bellionek. Spain's civil guard handles the border and maritime approaches. There have been dramatic moments, like the 2021 breach when around 8,000 people entered irregularly, and in 2026 reports described a much larger surge of roughly 60,000. Numbers in fast-moving situations can be contested, but either way, those episodes show how quickly a small city's capacity can be overwhelmed. Coordination with Morocco is crucial to stabilize things.
On the defense front, Spain keeps a permanent army command in Ceuta. You'll hear names like the Regulares, which historically were light infantry linked to North Africa, and the Legion, an elite formation. There's cavalry with modern tanks, artillery, engineers, logistics, the whole combined arms toolkit. Naval and air support are close from mainland bases. All of that underlines how the Strait still matters. And day to day, life goes on. University programs from Granada and UNED support education. A modern hospital anchors healthcare. The population in 2024 was about 83,000, with most people born locally. And neighborhoods called barriadas give the city a really local feel.
Okay, let's move on to a question that always comes up: sovereignty. Morocco calls the city Ceuta and says it's Moroccan land under Spanish control, framing it as a decolonization issue. The argument is basically geographic continuity. It's on the African mainland near Moroccan towns and shares a deep history with the Maghreb, so they see it as unfinished business from the mid-20th century when colonial borders were being untangled.
Spain's position, on the flip side, leans on legal continuity and local consent. Ceuta aligned with Spain in 1640, then Portugal formally ceded it in the 1668 Treaty of Lisbon. It's been administered as Spanish, with representation and autonomous status in recent decades, and residents generally express a Spanish civic identity. Spain also points out that Ceuta is inside the EU's legal fabric. So from Madrid's view, there isn't a colonial framework to unwind here.
Why hasn't this gone to an international court to settle it once and for all? I mean, it sounds like both sides have their own pillars to lean on.
Good question. I think it's because diplomacy manages it most of the time. Taking it to court risks a winner-take-all verdict that could inflame things. Bilateral talks let each capital calibrate based on trade, migration, and security. There's also the local piece. If a big change ignored what residents wanted, it could create more friction than it solves.
That makes sense. There's also the security umbrella question. NATO's Article 5 is the collective defense clause, but Article 6, which defines geography, creates some ambiguity about places like Ceuta. In 2022, NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said the alliance protects all allies and that invoking Article 5 is a political decision. Translation: if a crisis happened, the response would hinge on allied consensus, not just a map coordinate.
Right, so the takeaway is that Ceuta lives at the intersection of law, politics, and geography. My view, the long chain of Spanish governance and what locals tend to want carries a lot of weight. But I hear your point that geography and history knit it to Morocco. That tension is why the conversation never fully ends.
Switching gears just a little, pop culture. Luís de Camões, the 16th century Portuguese poet, channeled frontier life in Ceuta into Os Lusíadas, which celebrates voyages and battles. In 20th century history, writing and films about the Spanish Civil War, Ceuta appears as a crucial stepping stone. And in sports trivia, there's Naim, a footballer from Ceuta, who famously lobbed the goalkeeper in the 1995 European Cup winners' Cup final to win it for Real Zaragoza. That last-minute goal lives rent-free in a lot of memories.
Counterfactual time. What if Portugal had honored the 1437 treaty promise to return Ceuta after the failed Tangier campaign? If they'd given it back that early, Portugal loses its toehold on the strait. Without the cost of holding Ceuta, maybe they double down sooner on Madeira, the Azores, and the Atlantic African coast. The age of discoveries likely still happens, but resources shift. You could imagine earlier investment in shipyards for westward voyages rather than fortifying a North African enclave that wasn't paying for itself.
I agree, and maybe their strategy around Tangier changes too. If Ceuta's gone, the lesson about needing a hinterland to tap trans-Saharan routes might land faster. They might either push for Tangier at a different moment or decide land-based trade is too messy and instead put their chips on ocean trade. Real talk, that might speed up the pivot to the Gold Coast and Indian Ocean lanes. The catch is, Ceuta also functioned as a training ground. Without it, some officers and crews don't get that early hard-won experience. Maybe certain navigational experiments happen along a slightly different timeline.
So the plot twist is that returning Ceuta could have trimmed some costs, but it also removes a symbolic launch pad. Portugal might still nail the Atlantic playbook, just via different stepping stones. That's a story with a lot of plausible branches, and I'm down for that kind of historical puzzle.
Kind of gives you something to sit with, huh? A tiny city where seas, languages, and centuries meet and the walls still whisper what they were built to do.
So there we have it, folks. Stay curious, keep learning, and we'll catch you next time.